So my name is Mike McGarr. I manage the Build Tools team at Netflix, and I'm going to talk to you today about centralized teams in a decentralized world. This is a story of not only the engineering tools team at Netflix, but a lot of centralized teams at Netflix, like the platform team and some other teams that provide services, and some of the challenges we have operating in our, some of the challenges and some of the things we've learned operating in an environment like Netflix. And you'll find a lot of the stuff I talk about may or may not relate to your organization. So I'm going to start off with a story. So when I was a kid, I was very obsessed with fighter jets, specifically, I was obsessed with airplanes, specifically fighter jets. So I would collect everything I could about fighter jets, learn everything about them, learn about their armaments. But my favorite was the F-14 Tomcat. And so I could tell you almost anything about the F-14 Tomcat. I could tell you, which missiles it was carrying, whether that was a Sidewinder versus an AMRAAM versus radar versus long-range missiles, and I was obsessed. And as I got older, my obsession kind of died. But I still enjoyed looking at airplanes, and I would occasionally take one. And I'm sure a lot of you took an airplane to get to this conference. But what stuck with me was I spent a lot of time understanding how a plane flies and understanding aerodynamics, the basic principles. And there are four basic principles that impact how an airplane gets off the ground. And the first one is thrust. So the engines on the airplane will move it forward and create and push it forward, creating a force called thrust. Opposing thrust is drag. And so you'll have the shape of the aircraft, the stickiness of the air, the resistance of the wheels. Those will all prevent the airplane from going forward at a certain speed, and they'll be resisting each other. As the plane goes faster and faster, air flows over the top of the wings, and the wings are shaped in a certain way to create what's called the Bernoulli principle, Bernoulli effect, that creates a low pressure zone, which gives the airplane lift. And so you have to create enough thrust to counteract the drag to create lift, and that lift has to be sufficient to counteract the other force, which is the weight of the airplane, which is created by gravity and the mass of the airplane. So engineering tools, in some ways, is very similar to this, because we have a lot of forces that are pulling us in various directions, creating tension between whether the things we want to do and the things we have to do. And different than the picture I showed you about the airplane, there's no one direction we're going in, but we're constantly being pulled in these directions, and we have to play a balancing act. And that's really what I'm going to talk about today, is the balancing act and some of the core forces that are pulling a team like engineering tools at Netflix in various directions, and how we deal with that. The first one is our customers. So this is probably the most important force that we have to consider. We want to increase the number of delighted customers we have at Netflix. How many people are using our product? We also want to continually push on innovation. So we want to make sure that the products that we're delivering are constantly evolving, and that we're keeping up with the innovation that's happening throughout all of Netflix and the needs of our customers. As we push forward and create more and more innovation, that comes with that is change. And so as a result of innovating constantly, we also have to manage the rate of change and the impact of change has on our customers at Netflix. And then lastly, support, which, if you build a product, you have to support it. And so how do we play this balancing act between building new products, managing change, and then also making sure that we're balancing support? So when we look at these four forces, another way to put the goals for engineering tools, or our goals for kind of improving, are we want to increase the number of delighted customers while decreasing any waste generated by support. And then we also want to increase the rate of innovation while decreasing the impact of change. And so this is what I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about, and I'm going to break this up in those four forces. The first force I'm going to talk about, or the first vector that we care about, is our customers. So at Netflix, our customers are all engineers, and I think a lot of companies here can relate to that. And our engineers are pretty sharp. So we have a challenge, which is making the engineers at Netflix pretty happy with the tools and solutions that we develop. These engineers, and we operate in a culture that's pretty well documented and defined. How many people, show of hands, have seen the Netflix culture deck? Okay. So if you haven't ever read the Netflix culture deck, I highly recommend Googling it. It's on SlideShare. It's long. I don't know if you can't see this. It's 124 slides, but it's well worth it. It's actually the reason why I joined Netflix, because it changed. I read this culture deck and put the rest of my experiences in perspective, and this is where I wanted to work. But our core of our culture is we believe in freedom and responsibility. We have a high trust culture where we hire very, very strong engineers, and then we give them, since we have a high trust culture, we give them the freedom to make decisions that they feel are important. But with those decisions comes that responsibility. And so so engineers at Netflix are very empowered, and that creates, this culture of freedom and responsibility creates some of the constraints that our engineering tools team has to operate in. Because we are not going to change this, and we don't want to change this. This is a very good thing, but it brings with it some challenges. Danny's talk about dependency management at Netflix kind of highlighted some of the challenges just on dependency management. So we also have a very large microservice architecture. And this microservice architecture is predominantly in AWS cloud. But as a result of these microservices, each service that's part of our cloud, generally speaking, can be mapped to a single team, right? So a team and a microservice, generally speaking, are almost one and the same. You'll have some teams that have multiple microservices, and sometimes, I don't know if there's ever been a microservice that's managed by multiple teams, but in general, you can map services to teams. And what this allows us to be is very highly aligned and loosely coupled as an organization. So everyone in the organization is striving to create a great service for our customers, streaming service for our customers, but it allows each team to move at their own pace and to release products and to build tools, and they are loosely coupled from each other. What this also creates are subcultures. So within Netflix, each of these teams, these service teams, will develop their own subculture. These subcultures won't conflict necessarily they should not conflict with our core culture, but they carry with them some very specific beliefs. And this is not something that's unique to Netflix. This is in every single organization. And this is kind of a natural offshoot of having, say, a hiring manager believing that they want to build a team in a certain way, and they will carry with them some implicit biases about what they think a strong engineer will be and what that person looks like. You'll hear a lot about this in the tech industry, the implicit bias of hiring. This is not a bad thing, but it's the reality that each team will have a belief. On engineering tools, we have some biases and a subculture around test automation and software craftsmen. Not every single team at Netflix has that bias and belief. So this culture of freedom and responsibility, coupled with our highly aligned, loosely coupled subcultures, creates a unique challenge for the engineering tools team. Because as a result of all this, we really kind of have a free market economy existing within Netflix as far as tooling. And what I mean by that is engineering teams at Netflix have a choice. They don't have to use the products that the engineering tools team develops. They can choose to use something else if they want to. And so that is a motivator for us as an engineering tools team to build products and solutions that really not only just work because our customers have to use them, but are really great products and solutions. And I've used this word product, and we really have shifted towards being more product focused as a tools team. We don't, and one important distinction here is we don't own the build scripts for teams, we don't own their build pipelines, we don't own their services running in production. We build products that enable them to basically build, bake, and deploy into production as fast as possible. So if a customer comes to us with a challenge in their build script, like we'll work with them to make sure that we can improve it, but they're the owners of their build tools, of their build scripts. And as our products and what we provide as kind of a service or a product to the rest of the company is what we call the paved road. And so because our engineers have a choice, our paved road is essentially, we're turning to the engineers and saying, if you come in and you use our products, you're going to relinquish some of your freedom, meaning that you no longer, if you come onto our paved road, you no longer have all the choices you used to. But with that relinquish that freedom, you have now, you know that we're going to support this build, bake, and deploy process, and we're going to give you first-class support. So the engineering tools team is responsible for the choices going into the paved road, but we still have this force, this driving force saying that people can choose to go off the paved road. And I'll talk a little bit about how other teams that have how that has happened at Netflix. So the paved road at a high level covers kind of four major buckets. We build tools and services that enable engineering tools or teams to code, to build, to bake, and deploy. And most of this is familiar, except for probably this bake right here. So at Netflix, we believe in the immutable server pattern. So every single service every time we deploy new code to production, we don't deploy it to the existing server that's in production. We leave that server alone, and we never touch it. So if I want to deploy a new version of my service, the pipeline, the tools that engineering tools provides allows them to build a brand new server image, an AMI in the cloud, and then deploy that new image and then remove that old image. And so all the tools we build at Netflix for the build, bake, and deploy, our whole pipeline is kind of centered around this immutable server pattern. I won't touch much more on this other than kind of show you a little bit more because I realized when I first put this together, showing just build, bake, and deploy was kind of a teaser, so I wanted to show a little bit more of what we have. But this is a very high-level view of our pipeline and the tools we use to the rest of the company. As you can see, the bake is probably it seems like the least interesting because we have no logos there, no cool logos. So, but my team is responsible for Nebula, and we're starting to move into kind of more developer productivity and building more tools for engineers on the IDE side as well. So, but at Netflix, we've also found that this one paved road doesn't necessarily fit all our customers' needs. So going back to these subcultures, there are some teams that are very comfortable saying to engineering tools that we don't want to care about the builds and deployment processes. That's something that's not our expertise. The team is responsible for a service that does video encoding. They hire experts in video encoding, and their skill set's in video encoding, not in unit tests and build automation. So they're happy to relinquish the control to engineering tools. And so they're on the paved road, and they treat the paved road like a highway, super highway. They're not going to take any exit ramps. They're going to get on, and they're going to go on beyond there, and they're going to get off at the rest stops there, and they're not going to get off the paved road. But there's other teams, and Danny sitting up here is a representative from one of the teams at Netflix that's one of our customers that is a great example of this, is where they will often find that the tools that the engineering tools teams provides isn't always meeting their immediate needs, and they will take exit ramps and go down dirt roads and kind of pave their own, and figure out whether this is a place where Netflix might want to consider going down at some point. So when we build tools, we have to consider that, there's a wide spectrum of needs for our customers, and that we can't just force everybody to go down one paved road, that we have to consider that some teams are going to want to use our paved road a la carte. They're going to maybe choose Nebula for the build, but they might choose some other method for deployment. And I'll tell a story about that a little bit later. It's also pretty important for the engineering tools team to be our own customer and to dog food our tools. We have a lot of products, and so I showed you the paved road with all those, and it seems like we had about 6 products, but there's a lot more underneath, and that's a very high level. I dealt with one of the tools that we use, one of the products we use internally recently for the first time, and it struck me at how bad the experience was as a user of this tool, and so that forms kind of my opinion about how we need to invest and shift focus for that particular service going forward. If you're not using your own tools as an engineering tools team, you're not going to feel the same pains, and you're not going to understand what your customers' needs are. So along those lines, let's talk about support. I'm going to admit that this is probably the one area the engineering tools team needs to grow the most, and you'll kind of get a feel for that as I go through this. So with our freedom responsibility culture, what comes with that is this: you build it, you support it. So every single service at Netflix, if you build something, you're the one who's going to be on pager-duty for that service. And that is true of our customers, and it's true of us on engineering tools. The advantage for engineering tools, and I've had this experience before coming to Netflix and other companies where you're in a tools-like team, is that if the engineers who are your customers don't feel the pain of being on support for something, you're going to have a very contentious relationship. I was struck when I came to Netflix at how engineers would come down and say, hey, a new push of Nebula broke my build. Let's work on figuring it out. It was a very pleasant experience because everyone knows the pain of being on pager duty and actually getting paged in the middle of the day or at night. So I think this is an important element to the whole culture because everybody has this kind of built in. And sometimes tools do break. We're no exception. And as a result of tools breaking at Netflix, or the engineering our tools breaking, we have to make sure that we're supporting our tools and making it easy for our customers to come and talk to us. And so our support model, really, we want to optimize to make sure that our customers can get a hold of us as quickly and easily as possible. We want to reduce friction for them to get their problem solved. And so ways we do that are we use HipChat. And so HipChat is kind of the easiest tool and the easiest tool for our engineers to get a hold of us. We have a couple of HipChat rooms that we use. We'll have a generic engineering tools HipChat room, which everyone can jump in. Our customers are in there as well as us, and they will ask questions. One advantage of having a chat room like this is that you'll find that sometimes someone will ask a question in there, and then another Netflixer who's not in engineering tools will answer that question. Having that everybody in the same room, your customers as well as your engineers, can kind of create a community of everyone's helping each other. One of the problems with chat is that things get lost. So if something's going on or it's a very busy day and you ask a question in there and maybe 2 or 3 engineers from engineering tools are in there and they're chatting with other individuals, there's no threads breaking out in the engineering tools help room. And so your message can get lost and that can cause frustration. The other tool we use is email. And there's nothing special about the email. We have Google Groups. We have buckets for engineering tools. And this is also another low friction way of getting a hold of engineering tools. But we have the same problem with email as we do with chat, which is occasionally an email can get lost. It's a little easier to track which emails have been responded to or not, but this is still something that can create some frustration for our customers. A lot of times in chat, what you find is that sometimes something will take more than 5 minutes. And one of the advantages of being at Netflix is that we co-locate everybody at 2 Los Gatos. So all the engineers are in one building or 2 buildings here at Netflix. So we can easily ask somebody to just come by to our desks and say, sit down with us and let's work on the problem. And so more often than not, we're actually in the process of building new buildings. It's very important for us to build a space that allows for people to come walk by and ask questions. So come on in. It's very welcoming. Someone will help you out with your problem. And so more often than not, we'll have a table in the middle where people will like Rob will often be sitting there, or Danny will be sitting there, helping engineers with their builds, or our deployment team will be doing the same thing with deployments. But what this leads to is a lot of interruptions. So if you have HipChat, everyone's hitting you on HipChat all day, you have emails coming in, you have people walking by, and your job as an engineer is to develop products, you're going to be very frustrated. So as a manager at Netflix, we really want to protect what's called the maker schedule, right? And so I'm a manager, so I'm very comfortable in what's called the manager schedule. I have meetings all day, and it's true. But we kind of make a joke at Netflix that managers meet so that engineers don't have to. And my job is to protect the maker schedule. And we want to create large blocks of times where engineers can work heads down. And so but we also don't want our engineers to be disconnected from our customers, right? So, and my initial reaction to seeing some of the way that we support our tools at Netflix was, do we want to create kind of a tier 1 support arm really for engineering tools? And everybody on my team said, no, we still want to be able to help our customers. So what we have is what we call our first responder rotation. And so different sub-teams within engineering tools handle this differently. But on the build tools team, each individual on the build tools team will spend one day at a time answering email, chat, and helping walk-bys. And this allows everyone else on the team to basically turn off those channels and ignore those channels for that period of time. So we found that the first responder works pretty well, and PagerDuty is a pretty easy way. We already use PagerDuty for our product, so setting up rotations and schedules on PagerDuty, so it just makes it very easy to manage, and it just alerts you in the morning, hey, you're on PagerDuty, or you're on first responder today. This is an easy way to manage this. In hearing this, what you might be struck with is how ad hoc a lot of our support model is, and it is true. The support model, I think, is kind of the last thing that we have kind of matured as Netflix is scaling up. We are, in some ways, still operating like a very small organization, and this is where we're investing a lot of our effort in the next 6 months, really, to beef this up. What we have avoided up to this point is a ticketing system. So I've had some conversations with some other engineering tools teams here, and I've been on teams where if an engineer has a problem, they will submit a ticket. And I think that works. What has happened historically, and you observe, is that if we're optimizing for our customer's experience, that creates friction. I personally, if I have a problem, don't want to go open up a new browser window, go to Jira, find the project I want to go into, and then start typing up my Jira ticket, right? You're creating friction for the customers, and they're not going to enjoy that experience. And this is part of the reason, and some engineers don't love working in ticketing systems. So we've avoided this historically. But what we need to do is make creating a ticket easy. And we can't avoid, I think we've hit a point where we can't avoid having a ticketing system, but it doesn't mean you have to have everybody just working in Jira to manage your tickets. So by using the existing channels like Jira, HipChat, and email, and allowing bots, say in HipChat, to make it very easy for someone to create a ticket for an issue right there in HipChat, or forward an email to Jira, so they can continue to use the communication mechanisms they're currently comfortable with, and still be able to create tickets so that things don't get lost is probably the direction we're going to go in going forward. Some teams, like the Spinnaker team at Netflix, has started integrating and make it very easy to create tickets in the context of the product that they're using. So this is another thing we're doing right now. So right there inside the app, you have an issue, you can create an Jira ticket, or you can open up the HitChat room for that particular product. So making our help more product focused instead of team focused. So there would be a chat room for Nebula problems and a chat room for Spinnaker and all the other products, and then making the integration very easy inside the product. And I think the build receipts idea from Gradle.com is a great example of this, is that someone has an error right there, they're looking at the problem, being able to click a button and say, send this error message to the team that's responsible for it, the build master, then I think that's a great idea, and that's something that we're definitely going to be taking advantage of going forward. We want to minimize context switching and that the engineers on our teams have to do. We don't want them to jump around to different tools. If they're in a tool, stay in that tool and take advantage of that opportunity. Okay, so innovation. This is something that I think Netflix does very, very well. Sometimes the tools team doesn't always, though. So our tools team has, we do have a challenge, which is that we have to keep up with we have to build products that work for the majority of the company, the 80% of the company. And what that means is that we have to support not just the people who are on the bleeding edge, but also the laggards. Every single service team can move at their own speed. And so sometimes what we find is that the tools that engineering tools provides and the services tend to stagnate at times. A great example of this is Asgard. Has anyone used Asgard right now? One. Okay, good. You'll want to pay attention. No, so so Asgard is our deployment platform, and it's been around for a while. And at the time, it was very innovative. It provides an abstraction on top of AWS. I talked about baking. It allows you to define the concept of an application on top of multiple ASGs so that you can push a number of instances based on your old version as one ASG, and a new set of instances as older ASG, new ASG, and they're considered one application, and you can route traffic back and forth. This concept is still being used today, but the tool itself kind of stagnated after a while. Danny's team and other teams at Netflix started asking for features inside of Asgard, and the engineering tools team at the time didn't respond in a reasonable amount of time. What ended up happening is teams started developing their own deployment tools to meet their own personal needs. Now, this can be seen as a bad thing, but it actually turned out to be a very good thing for Netflix, because these teams were building and trying new concepts as far as how to deploy into AWS that were beyond what we were doing with Asgard, which was covering the 80% case. And they were running little experiments. And some of them worked and some of them didn't. And then when it came time to say, what are we going to do with Asgard and what's the future of Asgard, we reached out to those teams and started figuring out what are the experiments that worked for you and how can we embed those into the next generation of deployment tool. So this concept of being able to distribute innovation is not that uncommon, I think, in Silicon Valley, but I think the rest of the world, in my experience back east, before I came to Netflix, it was very hard to get a company to think about it, distributing innovation. You've heard about Google's 20% rule, and that's a great example of being able to say that everybody in the company is responsible for some innovation. And so by allowing these teams to actually maybe get a little bit ahead of us, run little experiments that were focused just on their particular service, and then, but still communicate with them and get feedback on how the innovation worked, is pretty valuable for Netflix. So has anyone reads the Netflix tech blog? So occasionally the Netflix tech blog will talk about our hack days. And so this is a picture from one of our recent hack days that happened this past winter. And I don't know if you can see, but that's a Nintendo NES. And on that Nintendo NES, a team got the Netflix experience running, which is awesome. And they actually played a movie. I mean, it's an awful, awful 8-bit, but it was a great hack day experience. But the idea that we have these hack days quarterly, or sometimes not quarterly, but we have these hack days built in, is a great opportunity for people to try something they haven't tried before. This idea of institutionalizing innovation, I think, is a pretty important one. When I've joined tools teams, and even a little bit on the build tools team, if we found that there wasn't enough opportunities, or the team wasn't taking opportunities to really kind of think beyond the immediate needs of the team, what I started doing is implementing just hack days for the team. So I would allocate, like, say, every other Tuesday, I will be the first responder for that day. You guys can find a corner, a little hole somewhere in the building, and work on something that has nothing to do with your current job. And freeing engineers up to just say, I don't have to worry about anything else. I don't have to worry about my day-to-day needs, but I also don't have to worry about support. Allows them to play with something they maybe haven't played with before. I think on my old company, that I think was something that we needed to keep continuously. On our team, it really sparked a change, and what I found is that those hack days almost aren't needed anymore. And as a result, the team has kind of started really embracing this. Let's make sure that we're not just thinking about the immediate needs of the team, but let's start focusing on beyond just a year from now or 6 months from now. So institutionalizing innovation is something that you can do very easily to start kicking the team down, creating new products for the future. So one other thing that you can do is think about who's on your team and how you staff your team. One of the challenges I've had in the past is looking at my staff and not being able to allocate a resource to working on something in the future. And this is a quote from Daniel Jacobson, who's also at Netflix, and he also happens to work on the Edge Engineering team. He's the VP of Edge Engineering. But his assertion, his theory is that managers should be focusing on hiring beyond their needs. So really focusing on building capacity inside your team that's beyond what you need. And this idea of creating, creating space where maybe 20% of the engineers in your team are underallocated and don't have, they're underallocated, that will give them the opportunity to be more innovative. Because they have the time and now the opportunity. So challenge your engineers, hire beyond your needs. Not everyone's going to have this opportunity, but I think it's a good thing to think about. If you're an engineering organization and you think you could be more innovative by getting 2 more people, find a way to justify that. Maybe innovation won't be the justification you need, but find another way to justify that. Build more, increase the size of your team, and then see if you can do some innovative stuff. All 3 of these things are really about making time and space for innovation. I think that's the critical takeaway for innovation. You got to challenge the individual on your team, but also you got to make space for innovation to happen. And with innovation comes change. this is probably my favorite part of the talk because I think this is one of the most underserved areas in engineering, is how we effectively manage change. So in 2014, the engineering tools team embarked on an awesome journey, which is we had to make a whole bunch of migrations that changed the company, change everything that the company had, right? So we had to get off of Perforce and onto Git. We had to migrate from Java 6 to Java 7. We were evacuating the data center, so we had to take all the Jenkins servers and not only move them from the data center, one master Jenkins server from the data center, but shard them and create Jenkins servers for each team or each large team at Netflix. So we went from one Jenkins server to like 25. And all these changes impacted almost every single engineer at Netflix. Some were more significant than others. Java 6 to Java 7 maybe wasn't as significant, but when you start talking about switching from Perforce to Git, not only are you changing the tool, but you're changing how engineers operate every single day. And when we were done with this, and we declared success, the rest of the organization looked at us and said, so we're done, right? And then we did this. And then we said, here's all the things we need to do in 2015. And as an engineering organization, the realization we made in 2014, and we're kind of really driving forward in 2015, is that change is a constant. Is that we're never going to be in the state where things are just stable. And so instead of just making these massive migrations and being really mechanical about it and manual about it, we really have to get good at making change. Change easy. So we started embarking on what we call change campaigns. And change campaigns, we call them change campaigns because it really is very similar to a political campaign. There's a start, you declare, I'm gonna run for president, right? Like I'm gonna make this change. And you're gonna be working on this change for a long time. And along the way, there's gonna be bumps in the road. You're gonna be kissing babies, but it's gonna be a journey. And at the end, there's gonna be, you're successful or not. And so we started using this term of change campaigns internally. And one of the first lessons we started realizing is that we have to get good at targeted communication. So one of the first things we started, and I see Noel back here, who's on the platform team, shaking his head yes, because this is a lesson that not only my team, but his team, we have to get really good at. When we started going on these migrations, we would just blast emails to the whole company saying, hey, we're going to make this change. And what happens is we've conditioned, by not only us doing that, but everyone else in the organization doing that, you condition people to ignore the email. And then when you so what we started doing is getting really smart about automation. So we started building tools that allows us to inspect all the systems that will be affected by this migration and targeting communication to them. And I was talking to some people yesterday about this. It's very similar to CPR. So how many people have gotten CPR certified? Okay. So back in the day when I first did it, the message was when you're applying CPR, you have to turn to someone and say, or you have to turn around the crowd that is forming, because there's always a crowd forming, and say, somebody call 911. And what ends up happening is no one calls 911 because everyone assumes somebody else is going to call 911. But then when the CPR directions change, so while I'm giving CPR, I would turn to someone and say, you call 911, you call 911. And being very specific about that's your job to call 911, people would change that, the behavior would change, and so people started to actually call 911. But having an email sent to me specifically saying your app or your 3 apps are currently, they're going to be impacted by this change coming, and you have about a month and a half to plan your resources appropriately to prepare for this change, is extremely powerful, and it reduces the noise that individuals receive, and so they now are getting valuable information that they can take action on. We also realized we had to go beyond email. And so we started finding different ways to communicate that changes are coming. So in our HIP chat rooms, we'd start putting banners up. Some were effective, some were not. We have a tool called Blesk. It's an open source tool, and what it is a snippet of JavaScript that you can put on the top of your applications. You can embed them in like Jira. We put them on top of Jenkins. All of our tools have it, and then you can go to the Blesk console and say, I want to announce something, and you have a checkbox to say which applications, and this message shows up on all the applications. So now these Blesk messages can be can be sent up to different applications throughout. So everywhere engineers are going, they can see these messages on the top of their applications, so they can't avoid it. This is an example of a poster we put up throughout the Netflix headquarters, talking about our Jenkins and Perforce migrations at the end of the year. So, and what we found, and so also this this is a link here. We have a system called Go, which is, when I first came to Netflix, I thought was the stupidest and greatest invention I've ever seen, because it's a URL shortener that's internal, but it allows you to create almost a language around your URLs. Because you can see right here, you can imagine a scenario where someone say, where do I go to learn about the migrations happening in 2015? And you just say, Go migrations, right? And they would know, oh, I got to just open the browser and say go/migrations. If you don't have something like this in your company, spend a weekend and build it, and it'll change everything. But we realized that every single one of these little tweaks we made to communicating would catch like another 5–10%, right? So we would send an email blast out, and we notice we get some response, and then we'd start putting the posters up, and we get more response. What you find with change campaigns is you need to constantly repeat the message through different mechanisms, right? And this is where it becomes very much like a political campaign, because it's a lot of work. I was in conversations with individuals who said, they would embark on their own change campaign for their organization, and the date would come, and people would be surprised that something broke, and they would complain. They would say, I sent an email. I don't understand why you didn't do this. And the problem is that you can't assume that people are going to read their email. You have to go through, you have to be able to communicate again and again different messages. Does anyone know what this is? So this is the adoption curve. And I found that this is extremely useful for understanding the life of a change campaign. And different teams at Netflix will fall into different buckets as far as the change campaign. So as we went through a change campaign, we would go through multiple of them. We start to identify that some teams were really over here always, right? And so I talked about edge engineering. They're almost always up here at the beginning of these changes, and they're leading the change, and they're sometimes the ones telling us to keep up with them. And then there are teams over here. They're always the teams that you have to kind of kick across the finish line, give them a little nudge. And when you start to understand that, you start to see these patterns, it becomes very valuable, because then you just know that your change campaign is going to be shaped like this. And what we started doing is changing our message throughout a change campaign based on the adoption curve. So when we started a change, we would start to evolve our message. So when we started a change, the message would be something like, hey, there's this new tool out there, kind of works, want some beta testers. And there's going to be like, this says 2.5%, but there's going to be people who are going to be like, sweet, that's what I want. I want something new. And they're going to be tolerant of the errors and the bugs in that tool. That gives you an opportunity to kind of get some feedback on whether the tool is useful, fix some bugs, improve some documentation. And then when the early adopters or the beta testers have used it, you change your message. You said, we built this tool, it's new, it's production ready, everybody come on and use it. And you'll find that people will just come in, just saying it's production ready, they feel more confident that they can use it now, and some people will start using it. And then you start to find that when people have a problem, say, and this tool is available and they haven't adopted it and they weren't aware of it, and they come in and say, I have this problem right now, like dependency locking being an example of this. I have a problem with some of my dependencies. Have you used dependency locking? No, I haven't used it. So it's a cure for what your problem is. And so we start fixing people's problems using this tool. And everything up to this point has been very positive. Like this is a positive message that engineering tools are sending out. We're going to fix your problems. It's a beta product, or it's production ready. And then our message kind of has to change slightly. So we have to start saying, the old way of doing things, we're going to have to deprecate that, right? So the end is nigh. Like, we're going to end up changing something, and so you have to get on board. And so by hearing that message, people will start to change their behavior. And then at the end, by saying just you're the last ones to go, that is actually very powerful, because no one wants to be the very last one through the door. So by saying, hey, we got our metrics, and there's only 5% of you guys left, like, you'll find a rush. But there's always that last 2%, right? And it's not their fault, because more than likely, they have actual real reasons for not being able to do this migration. They might be technology, they might not be really resource constrained, they might be the business has a different priority. And so for us, what we found is that we really, at that point, we're almost done. We need to get them to the finish line. And so this is when we actually have to roll up our sleeves and actually help them across the finish line. And we're happy to do it because we're almost there. We see the light at the end of the tunnel. And we found that teams will really appreciate it by saying, wow, we really don't have resources to do this, and you guys are helping us. This is great. So this campaign really changes, and this has been very effective in understanding how to manage that campaign. So this is a tool we built called Mist. This is a very beta version, and I've saved all my engineers at Netflix the trouble of having their email blasted on a presentation that we shared with the rest of the world. So I blurred that out. But what we use Mist for tracking adoption of a change. So you can see we have Tomcat, Java, and Base OS. This is what we're using right now to track our 2015 migrations. And you can filter. But being able to use a tool to measure the change and the progress of the change is pretty valuable, just even internally as a tools team. We found it's already worth the effort to do that. Because I can't tell someone they're in the last 2% unless I know they're in the last 2%, right? So these are, I'm sorry the resolution isn't that great, but these are two tools that we built around managing change, and there's nothing pretty here because they're just services that spit out JSON. But the idea is that we're also building services to help provide insight and manage the change process. So on the right, so one of the problems we had is when we went to Perforce to Git, I was surprised to find that there were individuals at Netflix that would say, I can no longer grep all of our source code. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, in Perforce, how many people have used Perforce? Okay, so for those of you who don't know what Perforce, it's essentially a giant depot with all projects in one directory. And then you can say to Perforce, instead of checking out my individual projects, I'm going to check out everything, which is all source code from all versions ever. And there were engineers at Netflix that would do this, get this all on their machine, and then grep the source code to find patterns. When we moved to Stash and Git, they lost this ability. So this tool on the right is the beginnings of a tool that will allow them to grep not only all of the repos in Stash, but then to make pull requests to the projects that have a change that we want to make. So basically, we want to be able to use the concept of a pull request to initiate this change process. So the fastest way to make a change is to do this for them. And a pull request is a great way because it can provide context that this is the details of the change that we want to make. This is why this change is important. This is the date it needs to be made. And having a pull request sitting in their project will give them the opportunity to test it, vet it, and integrate it whenever they're ready to do it. So we're really excited about being able to roll out a tool like that at Netflix. But this concept of being able to automate the changes and put tooling behind your change management process, I think is important. You don't want to just put manpower and be able to just create a ton of spreadsheets. We tried that, it doesn't work. So you want to be able to make continuous change easy, and I think that's the biggest takeaway is that if you look back at your organization, more than likely you're going to find that, and yes, I'm using continuous. This is like the theme, right? Yeah, I know. But continuous change is important, and this is like we've been burned by this, and this is something we really are excited about getting good about. So make continuous change easy. So the 4 big takeaways are, at Netflix, the engineering tools team has really had to learn. We've always been good at working with our customers and understanding our customers. We're really focusing on developing a stronger customer support model that really reduces waste and can scale with the organization. The company itself has really been good about making space for innovation, and this is something that we have done as well. And we really are focused on making continuous change easy. So I'd be remiss if I didn't make a pitch for my team. So I'm hiring. I have 2 open positions, a senior Gradle engineer and a senior full stack engineer. If you're interested, come talk to me. And I will make these slides available. I know they're not available, but I have, there's a GitHub repo with the slides. I used an awesome presentation tool called DeckSet. So if you've used Keynote or PowerPoint, stop. use deck set. All right, that's it. Any questions? Do I have time for questions? Yeah.
So you mentioned a lot about having space for innovation, like being able to build your own roads and other things, but you're also talking about adoption of your tools, so adoption of Paved Road.
Yes.
I mean, at some point, if you have many people that are all building their own tools, they will be building kind of the same tool, or
Yep.
solving the same problems. And to be able to reach them, you kind of need to know what they're doing
Yep.
as well. How do you manage that kind of friction?
Yeah.
You have liberty.
So having a team build a deployment tool when there's another tool, deployment tool that already works, most people will say that's wasteful, right? Like you're inherently generating waste, and we tend to be a little more tolerant of waste. So, yeah. So we're very tolerant of the waste, but can you repeat the question? I was getting flagged in the back. Sorry.
So the question is, yes, you will have some waste, but you
Yeah.
want to keep the discussion going and the collaboration, so at one
Yeah.
point you will be able to merge in.
Yeah.
How do you?
And so in the past, we made the mistake of not keeping the conversation going with the teams. Is that we said, best of luck, enjoy. And then recently, when teams have said we're going to go off and do something a little different, we've made sure that we're constantly in communication with those teams to understand how the progress is going. And then at some point, there's going to be a tipping point where they said, we've been successful and it's valuable, right? And like edge engineering is a great example of a team that's constantly doing this. And so our relationship with them has gotten much, much better over the years. And we have regular one-on-ones as managers with their managers. Whenever there's a new tool that they've released and they think is working, they'll demo it with us. And then we have a decision to make whether this is something that we can port and make it available for the rest of the company or not. But you know, I think that waste is valuable. So that's a good question. Any other questions?
With Mist, how do you actually collect the usage info? Do the teams report to Mist, or do you do a search?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think if it required any work on the engineer's part to get that information, it would be a waste of time. It wouldn't work. So Mist is reaching into every single instance in production and then pulling that information out. And so we have, as part of the platform, we have some facilities to enable that. And it's only going to get better, our ability to inspect and running instances. And on the build tools team, we have some other facilities that whenever we publish artifacts in Artifactory, we collect metadata. So we're going to be collecting a lot of metadata on not only builds and artifacts, but also running instances to gather the progress for changes.
I had a question. What is your strategy around documentation? That's the first question. Second is, how do you go about educating your engineer base so that your team is not constantly overburdened with support requests?
Yeah, so the question about documentation is I think we've kind of been handling that. I would lump that into support, and it's a very ad hoc process. We're looking to how we can revamp documentation. We recently hired a technical writer, but we find that even with having a technical writer, having engineers who know the code very well and close to it, who build it, be the ones authoring a lot of that content is important. We're going to be playing around with, we've started doing video snippets of like having videos of how to use the tools. And then the first responder model I think has been very effective. And then also really paying attention to the tipping points, not tipping point, but like when you get 50 emails a day about a problem, eliminate that problem, right? And so really focusing on usability of your tools and making it easy for people to not ask you questions. I originally had in here a tool called OSQA. It's very similar. It's basically a tool you can use. It's like Stack Overflow, but in-house. And you can use that to provide kind of a Q&A type model internally for your documentation. So for documentation, we really struggle with, do we spend that upfront cost of building really robust documentation, or do we let the documentation evolve over time? OSQA would allow you to do that.
I'll ask one more follow-up question. Do you have kind of a rough number that how much percentage of your engineer's time is spent in support?
No. Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess I could say is every single day somebody who's on first responder is spending we consider that day a wash as far as engineering goes. And it's because it's a mix of small, low questions, which aren't really the problem. It's when someone has a really, deep, pernicious build problem, and you have to really dig in and figure out what they're doing with their build script. Because we don't own their build script, there's a lot of a variety as far as what people are doing.
How do you find that people send on the support desks affects their ability to estimate the project that they're shooting? So let me give an example.
It-
If you ask me for how much time is it going to take me to do something, I'm an engineer, I'm going to come back with a really optimistic answer. It assumes no interrupts, it assumes I
Yep.
can read mail, et cetera, et cetera. Interrupts are incredibly expensive.
Yes.
Context switches are death to productivity. So I get why you have to do some of the things you said, but there's a huge cost there. I'm just curious how you manage that.
So the question is, how do we manage estimates, engineers getting accurate estimates? And the answer is we don't ask them for estimates. So, I mean, it's the reality. Like my roadmap for the team is like quarterly. Like, here's our quarterly goals. Here's the things we want to achieve. And engineers tend to be very self-guided. So, I mean, we don't have, I don't have daily scrums. I don't have like, Gantt charts or anything. I would quit if I had a Gantt chart. But we don't, wow, that was, we don't have, I don't have any estimates. We were like, rough order of magnitude, do you think you can get this done in this quarter? And if they turn around and say, I don't think we can, great.
Yeah, well, it's basically everybody on the team is going to know if somebody is slacking off, and that's going to get solved
Yeah.
pretty quick. So.
Yeah.
I want to jump with the point that building the software, building the product is only a very small part of what you're doing. I think you highlighted very well, you need to support it in everything. Building tests, documentation, supporting, answering email, it's all part of the job. You're not working.
Right.
It's part of it.
Yeah.
You need to do that in the estimate.
Yeah. Or the lack of estimates.
So out of curiosity, like, how big is your customer base? How many engineers using your tool? How many people are working on the tool and also helping the ratio?
So with Gradle, there's probably what, like 1,200?
There's 3 of us working on it.
Yeah.
Somewhere between 1,200 and 1,800 engineers.
Does Netflix have all the engineers in Las Vegas, same location?
Beautiful Los Gatos. Sunny, warm, beautiful Los Gatos.
Virtually all of the engineers.
Effectively, yes, every engineer. Yeah.
It's easier. So I was just thinking, if you have a global workforce and like different time zones, or also people not here, you cannot work by hub.
Yeah, and we eliminate that problem by saying everyone is local in Los Gatos. So I've had a couple conversations with people here about the challenges. I think as far as an engineering organization goes, if you're all in on co-location, great. If you're all in on remote, great. If you're in the middle, that's going to be hard. And especially if you have a team that like have 5 people that are local together, and then you have like 2 or 3 people who are like in another country, they're going to feel so isolated. Having everybody co-located and working together, I think, is extremely effective. But then you look at like someone like 37 Signals, who has built their whole company culture around everyone being remote and where you are. And they're also very effective, right? Because the whole company culture is built around being distributed or remote. I think it's hard when you mix. I'm not saying impossible, just saying hard. So, cool. Well, thank you. If anyone comes up, if anyone has any more questions, I have monkeys to give out for very good questions. And there's stickers up here too, more stickers. So.